is Keys to the Shop, episode 262, Understanding the Homeless Community, with Natalie Harris. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm so glad that you decided to join today. And if you have not yet subscribed to the show, just go ahead and hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've been helped by the show, if you love what we do here at Keys to the Shop, if you would give a rating or review over at iTunes, that would be so amazing. Now, whether you're just starting your first coffee shop or you've been in the business a while and you have a few coffee shops, there's nothing quite like working with somebody to gain clarity, a path forward, solve problems, to help you level up your operations or start your business on the right foot. That's what Keys to the Shop Consulting can do for you in your business. I work with people both remotely and in person to help them create excellent cultures, operations, and quality that their staff and customers will really enjoy. If you're interested in working with Keys to the Shop Consulting for your business, just send an email to me and we can set up a 15-minute phone call to talk about your situation and how Keys to the Shop might be able to help you. The email address for Keys to the Shop Consulting is chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. One of the amazing things about Prima Coffee is not just that they keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening in specialty coffee equipment and curate an amazing selection for you to choose from, but as equipment suppliers, they work really hard to outfit you with the right gear for your circumstance. So whether you're talking about espresso machines, grinders, brewers, or even things like under-counter refrigeration, they've got you covered. If you go to prima-coffee.com, you can check out that selection and also see that they have a lot of resources in the form of articles and videos to help equip you with knowledge about coffee and about the equipment. And that's why I love working with them, is because they're all about helping you be successful in specialty coffee. So I would encourage you, go to this website, prima-coffee.com/keys, use the code KEYS5 at checkout and get 5% off your entire order. Again, that's the code KEYS5 over at prima-coffee.com/keys, and you can get 5% off your entire order. So if you're in the market for commercial equipment, then I highly suggest that you check out prima-coffee.com/keys. Today's episode is also brought to you by the awesome Pacific Barista Series. They are the global leader in plant-based performance beverages because their products actually perform on the bar, because they're created for people who perform on the bar, who work behind the counter making lattes, and they have high standards. And so when Pacific puts out a product, it's been bench tested by some of the world's best baristas before it hits your shelf. They have an extensive selection of options, all of which can take the heat from steaming, provide amazing silky texture for latte art, and keep the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee. So important, and your plant-based customers are going to love you for this. Go visit their website over at pacificfoodservice.com to find out more information, get it in your store, and try it for yourself. If you want the best in quality plant-based beverages, then you need to be serving the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today we are going to be talking about understanding the homeless community. And of course, within the context of one podcast, we're not going to get a complete understanding. And the homeless community is not a monolith. Each person is unique and their situation is different. But by and large, as coffee shops, we have a unique position within our cities to interact with the homeless community. And the question always comes up, how do we do that? And especially the fact that we are a hospitality business, it always puts a weird tension in the mix when we want to be welcoming, we want to be accommodating, but we also feel guarded and we also want to provide structure and, staff don't know what to do, managers don't know what to do. And my opinion is that having been in these situations throughout my whole career, anyone who has been in the business for a long time has been in situations where they feel like I don't know what to do. Understanding comes from first creating a mindset around the issue to begin with. And that's what we're after with today's conversation. Understanding the homeless community starts with understanding the backstory to what most of them are probably going through. Creating policy and actions around this issue that are helpful is really only possible if you have a solid understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. And that's the whole point of today's conversation, is to gain an understanding of the backstory and context of what's going on with homelessness at least in a small part, and then to let that understanding help guide us to different actions within our businesses. And so to do that, I reached out to somebody local here in Louisville, Kentucky, who really understands this and has been actively working in this field for quite a long time. Today, we're talking with the executive director of Louisville Coalition for the Homeless, Natalie Harris. Natalie Harris joined the Coalition for the Homeless back in 2010. The Coalition for the Homeless is a nonprofit organization that's committed to advocacy, education, and collaboration on the issues of homelessness. The Coalition is a member agency of over 30 homeless shelter and service providers that are serving the Louisville and Jefferson County area in Kentucky, here where I live. And they are a staff of 12 doing great work led by Natalie Harris, who prior to this served as the director of the statewide Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky. Also, she served as a director of the Specialized Housing Resources Department at the Kentucky Housing Corporation and the State Housing Finance Agency, where she was responsible for the development and implementation of policies and procedures that related to special needs housing. She has served as a consultant to the U.S. Census Bureau, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Urban Institute on issues that are related to rural homelessness and supportive housing. Natalie was also the chief executive officer of the Miami Valley Housing Opportunities, which was a nonprofit supportive housing provider in Dayton, Ohio. So Natalie has been involved in this for quite a while and brings a lot of clarity and understanding to the conversation today. And even though she is talking from a very specific viewpoint of a particular area here locally around the Kentucky area, what she is saying applies to wherever you find yourself in the world today. You have a similar organization in your city. So as we talk about our mindsets towards that community and how it fuels the actions we take when we encounter that community in our personal lives and in our business lives. And we talk about helpful solutions that both we as individuals and professionals can take on to actually create change. And of course, we talk about a lot of other things in this conversation, but as we do that, just realize that this is a conversation meant to create a more empathetic and informed mindset around the issue of homelessness. In particular, how we as leaders in the coffee shop can create or recreate, rather, the narrative around this as we are hospitality providers to our community. And when wrestling with this topic in our heads, it's helpful to have some background, then some inspiration to help us come up with policies or approaches that will equip our staff and ourselves to be part of the solution wherever we are in the world. So I'm really excited to share this with you. It was such a pleasure to get to talk to Natalie today and learn more about what's going on in my own backyard here in Louisville. So I hope you benefit from this just as much as I did. Here now, without further ado from me, is my interview with Natalie Harris. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the show. Excited to talk to you. How's the day going?
The day is going well. Things are, we're actually in a holding pattern between different programs to try to keep people from being evicted in our city. And so we're in that hurry up and wait.
I hope you don't have to wait too long. There is so much to talk about here. And obviously, we're just going to be touching the tip of the iceberg here with this issue. And I'm excited to just learn from your experience. Talk about how your approach to the issue of homelessness has been shaped by your experiences over the years and where you're coming from.
Yes, I should start by just telling people a little bit about who the Coalition for the Homeless is. We are the overarching coordinating agency for all the different homeless services in the city. And I think people would be surprised in most part to know that there are over 30 different agencies in our city that provide services specifically for the homeless, even if that's not all they do. And all those different services make things complicated and competitive sometimes. So we work to try to make sure that resources get to the city. And we also try to make sure that those resources are made to be used for the best purpose, meaning that they serve the people in greatest need and meet the greatest priority for our community. The other two things that we do are we try to educate people about the issue of homelessness, because that helps to inspire action from the whole community. And homelessness is really just the result of a lot of systems in our community that aren't working. And so it's going to take our whole community to get those things working again. And then we also advocate for policy change that will make life better for people, either who are homeless or even better, that to prevent them from becoming homeless. Like right now during COVID, with all the eviction prevention work that we're doing to try to keep more people from becoming homeless in the future. And really, I came from a very middle class background in Birmingham, Alabama. There were a few homeless people in the 70s when I was growing up, but they tended to be single men who had alcohol problems. And since that time, our country's priorities and our system's priorities have changed so much that I think what's really important for us now that we forget is that homelessness is not normal. There should not be people in a country this wealthy that are sleeping outside, or they're sleeping in a car, or even sleeping in a shelter for any period of time. And we have become so normalized to that that we forget that isn't how it was. And when I was a young person, that was not how it is. And it's important for me, I think, as I continue my work and with even younger people who work with me, to remember that isn't normal, and we have to work to make that change, which would mean a huge dedication to more affordable housing and more work in our systems that end up causing people to become homeless.
What would you say over the years, since being, you described the juxtaposition between your experience in Alabama and now today, what has really changed to make this just blow up as an issue?
Yeah, it's one of those things that you can, if you are interested in policy and you see the government making policy, you can see where this is going. But for the most part, for the average person, you would never have known in the 70s the policy changes that were made. And it took decades for us to lose what we had so that we could wake up one day and find out that there were women and children sleeping on our streets. Back in the 70s, during the Carter administration, our country, as the federal government, spent $84 billion a year on housing. That then went down to about $24 million. And that has been every year since then that we have disinvested in affordable housing for people who do minimum wage jobs, maybe 2 minimum wage jobs, but still can't afford the housing that is necessary and can't get a subsidy. About 1/4 of the people who would be eligible for a housing subsidy get that subsidy. So we're talking 3/4 of the people who make so little income that they should get a subsidy aren't able to achieve it. And at the same time, we made some other shifts in our country. We decided to, for good reasons, I think mostly, to close down a lot of the programs that were in mental hospitals, where people were staying in a congregate setting, and let those people live in the community. But we didn't think about how they were going to afford to do that. And so we didn't take the money that was housing them where they were to allow them to have that funding where they would go. And we have really prioritized profits in our medical system over the health of people. So people are discharged early who need more medical assistance, whether that be mental health or physical health. And then on top of all that, we again prioritize profit over people with the opioid epidemic and other drug epidemics that have really hurt a lot of people. And definitely in Kentucky, we have been one of the hardest hit states in the country.
Wow. There's so many factors that I don't think very many people are aware of. And I would say that I'm probably not alone in, there's a lot of people that look at the issue of homelessness the way that you just described it a little bit ago, where it's this omnipresent thing. For at least in my generation, I'm just like, there's always this presence, right? It's growing. I don't know how it's growing, but these extenuating circumstances of policy and our values of things over people, profit over people, as you say, it sounds like it just makes it a very a losing proposition for anybody who finds themselves dipping into that area, in homelessness or teetering on the brink. It's like just a little push pushes you into that category, and it should, I imagine, make us more empathetic and create more urgency with it. But correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the reactions that might happen is that people just say, well, I hope like Louisville Coalition for the Homeless does some good work for that. And like, let's let these organizations deal with that, and let's just keep on going. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, well, I live in a community now in Louisville where you would never have to know that there are poor people. Often with friends of mine, I will hear people say that this is a really affordable city, and it is if you make a good living. But we are one of the poorest cities in the country, and we're one of the most segregated cities in the country. So that means that I don't have to see the extreme poverty that is in parts of our city, and I don't have to understand what those families are going through in systemic racism and systemic poverty. And then if something bad happened to me and I needed help, I'm much more likely to have family or friends who could help me in a crisis. But if you come from systemic poverty, you don't have family and friends who have money and can help you deal with that issue. And so it continues generation after generation. And with the segregation we have, that poverty continues in the same neighborhoods, so that the people around you are also poor or not poor. So without integrating with each other, we really don't understand what other people are going through. And both our politicians and our communities in general have made it okay to now take these systemic issues and blame people for their own lack of being able to get out of these systemic issues that we've created. And a lot of times people don't realize that the majority of homeless people, not just here in Louisville, but anywhere, are working and are people that are homeless for short periods of time. A lot of them are single parents. And what you see on the streets, which is what most people think of when they think of homelessness, is only about 10% of the homeless population in any community. Most are people who are working really low paying jobs, trying to do the best they can, but not able to meet all their needs. And all it takes is one car breakdown, hospitalization, some other issue that they don't have savings to address, to cause that family to pay for that cost instead of their rent or whatever else they need to pay that month. And then they're in a cycle because they're never going to have enough money to catch back up.
Right. And so your programs for proliferating affordable housing at least provides a stable presence of some factor that previously wasn't a stable factor that we take for granted. Like you mentioned, you have a network of people that are going to lift you up. You have basically a system that's working in your favor, but they have the opposite. Like they have to fight against all of the factors that you consider your allies are actually their enemies, for lack of a better way to put it. And so when you're helping people rewrite the narrative, I mean, how do you overcome that? When you know that people are constantly, they're getting off, here in Louisville, are getting off 264. They're seeing the homeless population, only a very, very small percentage of them. You've got the police saying don't interact with the homeless and don't, talk to panhandlers, et cetera. There's all this stuff that makes us want to stay in our cars, stay inside, and only let that small percentage write the narrative. I mean, practically speaking, how do you go about helping people shift their mindset to a broader perspective?
I really do think one of the things that any of us can do is to know somebody else who is different from us, that we, in a normal year, we have opportunities like the street count that we do once a year, which is actually next week, but will not be taking volunteers this year to go out on the streets, and Stand Down, which is an event we do the first Wednesday in October every year, where people can come in and meet people. And what you're able to do is just meet another person, escort them through the process, And my husband, each year when he goes, he always comes out and says, wow, that guy was a musician. I have so much in common with him. And he doesn't, I think we're able to think of people as other, like that there's something different or missing about them that makes them who they are versus who we are. And what we really need is to realize how common we are and how much we have in common. We have a advocacy education director, and one of the things he does is he works with homeless young adults who are 16 to 24, and he has one of them speak at each of the Metro Council meetings just to make sure that they understand that these homeless young adults are dealing with things that they could never imagine, and hear it from their voices. And when they are able to hear those stories, it opens up your heart. It opens up your mind to, oh, well, that I don't have any clue what it's like to live in a neighborhood where people, including maybe my parents, are dealing drugs because it's the only thing that they see as an opportunity. And how do I get out of this? How do I make a better future for myself when I've never seen anything else? And so I think that listening to other people, I don't recommend that anyone do anything that would put them in an uncomfortable or unsafe situation. But a lot of times homeless people are just ignored because they make us feel uncomfortable. And when you actually just stop in a comfortable setting on the street or with somebody else and just talk to them, you'll find out, okay, there's probably a lot more to the story. There are people who are just trying to get their next fix. And that's just what drugs do to people. And so you need to be careful of that situation. And are you feeding an addiction by giving money to somebody in that situation? But there are a lot of people who are just really down on their luck and haven't figured out how to get out of that situation. And having somebody talk to them as if they're just human, and another human being in our community in a bad situation can also be helpful to them to get what they need to get out of that situation.
Yeah, that's a good word. And I keep thinking about how we talk to ourselves when we are either in those conversations or thinking we want to, or we're confronted with the reality of somebody's humanness, because we do try to other people in those situations and make it seem like it's this anomaly when it's absolutely not, as shamefully it's not. And we think that it is them. We say it's them, because we have ultimate faith in the system again, to that it can't be that, because anybody in America can just, magically, transport themselves out of poverty and addiction cycles into the middle class, et cetera. So when we're talking about hearing these stories, I wonder if you would talk about like the actions that you've seen most beneficial for somebody confronted with the hard reality that this could be your parents, this could be your son or daughter, and then not just shoving it back into your head, the back of your mind, and letting your life go on, because the long-term dedication to helping this, being of help in this problem seems like the best strategy, rather than just like, oh, okay, I'm reminded there's homeless folks out there, and that's my reminder for the year. I mean, where does traction actually come from when public becomes truly aware and connected with the problem?
So I do think, and especially with the folks that are probably listening today, there are probably two different types of situations where people are going to encounter somebody. If you're going to encounter them, on the street, you are walking to lunch and you see somebody and this is just a one-time occurrence, or you see somebody flying their sign that they're homeless and they need food. One of the things that I do, because I do have a lot of family with addiction, and I hope that nobody is helping them get their next fix, I usually keep a couple of packs of things in my purse or in my car that would just have, like a snack bar or some crackers and, something like that. When I can remember, I will get a McDonald's card, a $5 McDonald's card, and stick in there. And then there's a card you can get there's a project out of Family Scholar House called Louis Connect. And it is a phone app that anyone can find any free services, including shelter and food and all of that, right on that app. And so I put that as well in there so that either that person or somebody who can help them can get to that for resources. I think if you're just in that kind of situation, just having that meaningful conversation of, hey, how are you today? I saw you. I hope this can help. Is probably the best you can do. And just having that human interaction is a good thing. But I do think that some of the people listening today probably own businesses or work at businesses where they see somebody coming in over and over again. And that may give you more of an opportunity to know the whereabouts of that person and what kind of situation they're in. And there are outreach programs all over the city. Probably the easiest one to contact is St. John's Center. And they have outreach workers that will come and meet with that person. And it will probably take more than one time. The first time they will, get to know that person and try to figure out the situation and what their needs are. But they will come back and they'll keep trying to work with that person until they can convince them to come in, to go to shelter or to get on the waiting list for housing and to try to work toward their mental health or chemical dependency issues. And so that's a really good way for somebody you have a little bit more interaction with, or if you know of a homeless camp where people are staying regularly and they can go out to that site and start working with them.
That's great. Yeah. And that brings us to sort of like the people listening are specifically owning businesses, leaders in businesses of customer-facing coffee shops. I mean, the coffee shop is sort of it's a third place for the community, but for the homeless community, especially, it's a place where they want to be able to duck in, get some shelter, or it's an issue that coffee shops have been dealing with for a long time now, in that they don't know how to deal with their perspective towards that community, because at one level they want to make sure that they're not opening up opportunity for any kind of unsafe situations, things like that, being realistic about the situation, where at the same time we're hospitality-based business, and it feels antithetical to have those feelings towards that person, that community. And so in beyond resourcing, I guess, I mean, what would you say to coffee shops specifically? What role can they play in their cities, either in their daily operations as they see the community pass by or come in, or as advocates? Like, what roles can coffee shops play that are helpful to the long-term success of the people in the homeless community now?
Yeah, so I do think it's important that people not well-meaning get themselves into bad situations. So I've been in lots of businesses, coffee shops and other, where people who are homeless or not homeless come in and are rude and inappropriate. And so there should be rules that are set for anyone to comply with that address those issues. But if somebody is following the rules and is doing what they can to be as clean as possible, which may not be possible in the situation they're in, and as quiet as they can. But the issue is just that they don't have enough money. I have seen some coffee shops in the city that will have a fund so that if somebody who can afford can come in and buy their cup of coffee, but also put money into a bin for somebody who can't afford it, that might be a great opportunity. That if you have somebody who comes in regularly and they're sitting there but they can't afford a cup of coffee, then you could use those funds to cover the cost of that person and give them a safe, quiet place to be, as long as they're following all the rules. And that might be a chance to kind of learn their story and let them know about some of the resources. I will remind people again, just go to Louis Connect, and it's LOUIE Connect.com. And you can yourself learn about some of the resources in the community, so you could let people know, hey, there are these resources out there. And you can also help connect them to the outreach teams once they feel kind of comfortable with you, and they don't feel like you are, you're going to tell on them that, they're going to get in trouble. I will say too, there are some people who maybe are having a mental health crisis or a chemical dependency crisis. And if that's really extreme, the best bet is to call 911. You do want somebody to come if that person maybe has overdosed, or that person is having a mental health crisis, to get them to the medical help that they need in an emergency. But if you think maybe it isn't really that extreme, but that person is still suffering, and you don't know where to get them, you can also call 311. And that is the city system to send people out. They may send out the outreach workers that I was talking about, or they may send somebody more appropriate from the city if they think that's the issue as well. So it may feel like I'll get calls all the time from businesses saying, I want to help this person, but I'm really worried about them, and I'm afraid if I call 911, they'll send the police. But that's not necessarily bad. There is a special team of the police now that was created this past year just to deal with the homeless, and they do outreach on the city with these outreach workers. And so that could be the first step in them getting connected to outreach or to a crisis stabilization unit if they're having a mental health crisis.
Okay, yeah. And I imagine a lot of this stuff is universal, like just going to find information in your local city or wherever you are. Your city of any size, usually mid to large size cities, have a lot of these resources available to tap into and get yourself knowledgeable about. So you mentioned calling the police as sort of a kind of a last resort in some way for somebody's physical health. And I've had to do that maybe one or two times in, the 20 years that I've been in coffee. Most of the time, though, it seems there's either, just it's a non-emergency situation, but the compulsion that we have is to immediately just call the police and get this problem out of my store, get it out of my site. And there's this interesting dynamic where how you handle the situation as a professional really sets up how people view your business. And you can, out of fear, overreact to a situation. And I'm not going to say that I've never done that. I've certainly done that before. But then I've had so many interactions, even recently here in the city, working in shops, where it's a combination where somebody, as an example, needed to, they were having a mental health crisis, but it was mild enough. They were just imagining things happening to them, so they didn't want to go to the shelter because that's where stuff was happening to them. And they just needed to use the bathroom. And usually I'm just like, I'm a little wary of it. But just talking to him for a little bit and seeing in his eyes that he was just scared because he had a colostomy bag and he hadn't emptied it in 3 days. And he was crying right in front of me. And, if I had just reacted like police now does, boom, 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 that connection would never have happened. And in fact, maybe I wouldn't have been pursuing empathy with the homeless community as much as I am today without those connections. How do you see businesses sort of shifting their mindset effectively from reactive, compulsive, push it away, basically by force, versus making it a standard policy? Making empathy and interaction sort of a standard policy.
Yeah, I think your example was absolutely perfect. If you don't ask people what they need and what the situation is, then we make a lot of assumptions. And asking those questions at first is really important. Like, what do you need? And even in that situation, if you'd said, hey, I'll give you a free cup of coffee, but just go away, that didn't solve his problem either. Understanding that what he really needed was the restroom, solved his problem, and actually made him feel like somebody was listening to him for the first time. I think also it helps to be educated I'm much less uncomfortable talking to homeless people on the street just because I know there are resources. And so I don't feel panicked when people are able to answer me and tell me what they need, because I can tell them, and anybody here can tell somebody if they need to get into a shelter that night, they should call 637 beds. It's open from 10 to 3 every day, and that is the reservation service for homeless people. I know a lot of people are scared to go into shelter right now because of COVID, but they are practicing really good practices. And until the numbers got really high in the city, we had no outbreaks of COVID in the city at all. There has been one recently, but those people have all been separated out, and the shelters are continuing to comply and work with the health department. The other thing people can know is that there are places for people to go during the day. And so there are various shelters, day shelters during the community, in the community as well. So people don't have to feel like, oh, they have to stay here until the shelter opens tonight. There is a place for people to go. And right now during COVID, Salvation Army on Brook Street has their shelter open 24 hours a day so that people can get off the street and have a warm, safe place to stay. And so just knowing more about what's available in the community can help you feel like you're not trapped or unable to help that person in that situation.
Yeah. So many owners of coffee shops, globally are involved in their community. And in fact, when you ask people, and I've interviewed so many people on the show and know so many people that start because they want to be a community hub. They want to be co-created with their community. And this is part of the community that sometimes is not really thought about. In fact, I've seen people from the homeless community that they dwell on the same part of the sidewalk outside the shop, but they actually take to like cleaning up the sidewalk. And they start like not working officially for the business, but they're advocates. They become advocates because they've been treated well, and it's reciprocal. But oftentimes the owner, in their best intention, it's not disseminated well to the staff. So you hire baristas in this case, and you might tell them, like, this is our view, et cetera, about homeless. But it's not necessarily something that they're equipped to be able to handle on their own. I mean, what do you suggest people do in terms of, I know there's like de-escalation programs that you can be involved with, or in the best cases for customer-facing businesses like coffee shops. What have you seen be the most successful in equipping your hired staff to actually, execute your values and your intentions toward the homeless community?
Yeah, I do think like being able to explain that to staff is hard. The type of staff that you're hiring are interested in coffee and in, serving coffee and making it the best they can. And then all of a sudden you start talking about the community that will be there. And I don't think a lot of people, when they take that job, think through all of what community looks like. If people are interested, 7 County Services does have mental health training for the community. It's, I think, like a 3-hour training that is available online. So that would be something that could be offered to all staff. I believe that is free to anyone. But there would definitely be a way to cover the cost of that. If somebody was really interested in getting their staff trained on that, just call me and we'll figure that out. But I do think that it's something that'll take a while for people to get used to. Just like, anything else that you would have to do in that job. Until you do it and get used to people, it's harder. One of the best examples I can give in the city, and unfortunately it is part of what our problem is right now, is our downtown library. It is probably the biggest day shelter for homeless people in the city. Mm-hmm. And their staff are really well trained on how to deal with homeless people, because so many do come in there just to be warm and safe during the day. Like I was talking about before, they do have rules about you have to be quiet. And so if somebody acts out or bothers someone else, they do have to be asked to leave. But otherwise, people are allowed to stay there. They're treated with respect. They have staff that are trained on de-escalation and mental health, and understanding and identifying it. And so that would probably be a good organization to talk to about how they work through training their staff.
So through the whole conversation so far, which has really been awesome, and really helpful to start framing our mindsets around this issue, this through line of connecting with the actual people, learning about the resources, and really becoming familiar with the backstory and circumstances surrounding the issue. It sounds like once you've done that and you're committed to doing that, your steps can be ordered accordingly based on what what position you're in the world, a business owner or an individual. And so as we wrap up here, I guess I want to know from you, like, talking to coffee shop owners and coffee shop professionals, what would you have them remember and do after listening to this to really start moving in the right direction, to be a part of the solution to the problems that homeless folks are going through, and really help them, feel accepted, and also even help them lift themselves out of that cycle?
I think probably the first thing I would do is some education about your community. Who are the homeless in my community? Who are the people who can help them in my community? So that you are prepared to help people and feel empowered when you do talk to them. And then just start with one person. Is there some person that you see more often around your shop or in your shop? And just start small. Ask them how their day is. Try to find out a little bit about their story. Most homeless people who've been on the streets for some time are leery of other people, and it may take a little while. They may seem a little standoffish. But I know from personal experience with my family and other people that I've known, that usually the best thing to help somebody who's in a situation where they have hit bottom is to find somebody else who's willing to listen to them and encourage them to try to get help. So they may not be able to be the person who can give them the help, but if they are listening to that person and then encouraging them to on their own go get that help, they're a lot more likely to let down their guard and try to do that. And I think that just, that one-on-one being human with somebody else is probably the best thing that they can do.
Well said. Man, I really appreciate you being on the show and helping us understand this a lot better. And I think obviously there's a lot more to talk about, but this conversation is a good place to start. And so I wonder if we can stay in touch with how we can stay in touch with you and what's going on with Louisville Coalition for the Homeless. And where can we connect with what you're doing?
Yes, and it's an ongoing story now during COVID with the number of people who maybe have never thought about homelessness in their lives. Maybe some of them are people who are employed at coffee shops and are dealing with eviction and struggling right now. I think a lot of us are learning to have a little bit more compassion because it's a lot more of our community that is suffering right now.
Right, exactly. And so where can people find out more about what you do and your website, et cetera?
Yes, please go to our website. It's louhomeless.org, all one word, LOU Homeless. And we have a lot of resources for what is going on in Louisville and what services are available in Louisville. But I can promise you there is something similar in any community of any size. And even in smaller communities, you will find that there are statewide programs that will assist people who are homeless in more rural communities. So it's pretty well covered thanks to a lot of the federal funding. And so there's somebody that you can reach out to wherever you are.
Perfect. Natalie, appreciate you being on the show again. Thank you so much for all you've shared with us.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I hope that you all enjoyed that episode and that it gave you some insights into the topic of homelessness and understanding the homeless community, especially the points made here by Natalie of being able to connect as an individual, one-on-one with the person. As I said in the beginning of this episode, it's, we talk about these things. It's an issue. It's hard not to talk about homelessness as an issue that creates a monolith out of a community where these are individuals. And one of the most powerful things is to go around that and say, I'm going to talk to the individual. And when you do that, you get to know their story, it gets to fuel your empathy, and that understanding that you gain really allows you to create informed policies that would be less in conflict with, especially as coffee shops, our understood place in our cities as places for hospitality. Of course, there's balance in how we approach everything within this, but I really enjoyed that aspect of this conversation where we kept coming back to that idea of connecting with the individual. And that might be the challenge that we give ourselves after this podcast. When you're out walking around, when you're in the cafe even, talk to people, learn their story, connect with somebody on a personal level, and see how that conversation helps guide actions. So a huge thank you to Natalie Harris for joining us on the show. We really appreciate the work that you do and how you've inspired us to do work ourselves. And I would encourage all of you to check out the show notes. There's plenty of links here to help you find answers to some questions you might have as a result of this episode. And again, I would encourage you, find out who is doing this type of work in your community and start asking them questions, as I have done with Natalie. So now, if you have any questions or comments or feedback about this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, just send me an email. chris@keystotheshop.com is my email. And that's also, of course, where you can reach me for Keys to the Shop consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. And that is it for our show today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I hope you really benefited from this conversation. And of course, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.